Good evening. We're just about to get started. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We'll just let a few more get joined on. Okay, so let's make a start. Thank you so much to everybody that has joined us for this event, International Workers' Day, the Fight for Sex Workers' Rights. This is the second in a series of events on socialist feminism that Momentum has been putting on. And I think it's really appropriate that the first event, which was Why Are We Socialist Feminists?, took place on International Women's Day. And now this event is taking place in advance of International Workers' Day, 2 days I think that particularly unite us in terms of our socialist feminism. So good to see so many of you here. My name is Chloe Hopkins. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a campaigner with Labour for Decrim, and I'm also a candidate for the Labour Party National Women's Committee, where I'm being supported by Momentum and by LRC, the Labour Representation Committee, which is actually affiliated to by ECP, one of our organisations that we're going to be hearing from this evening. So I'm delighted, I really am delighted to be chairing this amazing panel this evening. We've got some wonderful speakers for you. And, you know, I think you're all going to go away very, very informed. I'm going to start off by just giving everybody a quick rundown of the structure of this evening's event. We're going to run for about an hour, and I'm going to give you a bit of the brief background before we hear from our speakers. And each speaker is going to speak for about 5 minutes. Then I'll be asking them a question. So do make sure if you've got any questions, you pop them in the chat. And before we move on to each speaker's next one, that'll be your opportunity. Any questions, keep them in mind, get them ready to go. Now, as I said, we're holding this session as a part of a series on socialist feminism. And you know, International Workers' Day, which is what we're leading up to at the moment, is when we as socialists, we celebrate and we commemorate the work, the campaigns and the struggles of the labour movement across the world. And that's why today, for this event, we really wanted to focus on a specific workers' struggle that has not always received the recognition or the solidarity that it has deserved from the wider movement. And that is the fight for sex workers' rights. So this is also a feminist event, and we all know that sex work is very much gendered work, and sex workers have often faced the very sharp point of gender-based violence, but they are also some of the fiercest fighters against the patriarchy and for a feminism that recognises and supports all women. Around the world, sex workers have been campaigning and are continuing to campaign for decriminalisation of their work, safety from violence, an end to stigma, accessible healthcare, and the right to speak and organise for themselves. Now, as part of that campaign, recently sex workers in their allies who are members of Decrim Now, which is a fantastic organisation, and I would certainly urge all of you to look them up, and should be seeing a link to their Twitter as well, so do follow them there. But Decrim Now organised an open letter to MPs in Westminster, which was opposing attempts to impose the Nordic model. And that is a damaging legislative model which purports to decriminalise sex workers and criminalise the clients, but in fact increases the danger for sex workers, especially those who are the most marginalised. Now, sadly, that model is being proposed as a potential amendment by a Labour MP to the Dangerous Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill. But, you know, I'm really heartened by the solidarity between the movements of sex workers' rights and the wider Kill the Bill coalition. I know many sex workers and allies will be involved in the Kill the Bill May Day action this Saturday, and I certainly hope that all of you get the chance to be involved in a local demonstration as well. So that's enough from me. just giving you a little bit of a brief introduction to our issues, but you're going to hear so much more from our speakers. And I'm going to just let you know who we've got speaking before I bring them in. Our speakers this evening, we have Laura and Kate from the English Collective of Prostitutes, which is a network of sex workers, and they've been campaigning for sex workers' rights since 1975. If you want to see something great, do look up the image of Tony Benn and the English Collective of Prostitutes when they held in the 80s their Hookers in the House of God protest. There's some fantastic photos out there. I suggest you definitely give those a Google. Then after that, we've got Ivy and Tess, who are members of United Sex Workers. Now, United Sex Workers is a branch of the UVW union, and it's been formed by strippers and sex workers in the UK to organise for better working conditions for sex workers and their fight to change the industry from within. Then after that, we have the fantastic Dame Catherine Healy, who is the national coordinator and a founding member of NZPC Aotearoa, the New Zealand Sex Workers Collective. NZPC were involved in drafting the 2003 Prostitution Reform Act, which actually made New Zealand the first country, and so far the only full country, to decriminalise sex work. And then our final guest for this evening will be Sarah, who is a member of Labour for Decrim. And Labour for Decrim is a grassroots campaign of Labour activists who support the full decriminalisation of sex work, and they seek to make that support for decriminalisation Labour Party policy. So I hope you're as excited as I am for the wonderful speakers that we've got this evening. I'm really delighted to say that our first speakers will be Laura and Kate, and they're going to talk to us a little bit about the work of the English Collective of Prostitutes and the challenges that are facing sex workers today. So, brilliant. Thank you both. Why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming to tonight's event, and thank you to Momentum for organising and inviting us to speak. I'll start with an introduction to the ECP and a bit about who we are and what we do. And then Laura will speak about the issues facing sex workers in the current political climate. And then I'll round it off with some closing ideas about intersectionality and what solidarity could look like. So the English Collective of Prostitutes is a grassroots organisation made up of sex workers and sex worker allies campaigning for decriminalisation of sex work and the rights of sex workers to organise, to unionise and to work in safety. We also campaign against austerity and benefit cuts, which have disproportionately impacted women. And we campaign for economic alternatives because nobody should be forced into sex by poverty. It feels really important to express that the current prostitution laws are enacting more harm upon the people that they are supposed to be protecting. And this is why we believe that it is so important that policy is informed by those working within the sector. So whilst it is legal to exchange sex for money, anything that sex workers do to contact a client or ensure that they are kept safe whilst they're working is criminalised. Workers are continually vilified and marginalised through the discriminatory implementation of prostitution laws, and police violence is a significant problem.
Hi everyone. We wanted to give you some examples from women in our network of the impact of criminalisation and what the obstacles to unionising, for example, are. So firstly, example, women working on the street are facing arrests and fines, sometimes £150 each time they are convicted. And obviously, where do you go to pay that fine? You go back onto the street. Prostitute cautions stay on your record until you're 100 years old and you can't appeal them, unlike other cautions. Women would prefer to work in close proximity to others, so someone can look out for you, take down registration numbers, that kind of thing, but this is more likely to bring you to the attention of the police. Women who used to work in Forest Gate, for example, have recently been moved out to an isolated wooded area by a police crackdown which was supposedly aimed at clients, but that was the impact on the women. One woman in the ECP, who became a point of reference for other women working on the street, was helping with rights, information and support, who in any other industry would be seen as a trade union rep, but she was targeted for arrest by the police for doing that work. Women working indoors are facing raids, arrests and eviction for working together for safety. And one woman in our group who started going around other flats to discuss how women could raise their prices was told she could be prosecuted for controlling prostitution, which is a 7-year prison sentence. And brothel keeping charges, also carrying up to a 7-year prison sentence, are most commonly brought against sex workers working together for safety. All the things that women do to try and keep safe, like installing CCTV, telling a friend who you're seeing and where, paying a receptionist in a flat, all make you vulnerable to arrest. Even carrying condoms are sometimes used as evidence against you. So what we're calling for is getting rid of these laws so that sex workers can work together for safety, improve working conditions, and be able to actually just associate with each other without breaking the law. Decriminalisation is gaining ground, and also in the US particularly because of campaigns led by Black trans women showing that the laws are implemented in a racist way. You'll hear more about it, I'm sure, but criminalising clients, which is the proposal, a possible proposal to this policing bill, does nothing to improve conditions, and only its stated aim of actually reducing prostitution. In many countries where it's been implemented, it hasn't even done that. And if you actually want to help us reduce prostitution, which we want to do, then help us increase universal credit, stop benefit sanctions, support calls for care income for people. We have a long list of things you can support.
Yeah, just to round it off, kind of just echoing what Laura's already said, that I think it's really important that we're able to have an intersectional conversation when we talk about sex work. So, we need to talk about austerity, and we need to talk about an inept benefit system that leaves many mothers left without financial support for 5 weeks, leaving them with limited options when it comes to feeding their families. We need to talk about rent caps. We need to talk about transphobia and homophobia, which drives many people out of other channels of employment. So we are campaigning for the worker status so that we can end exploitation, and it allows access to financial support. We're asking to end the punitive approach to sex workers, which means that they are the target of police raids, deportation and criminal records, which can then make leaving the industry and working in another sector almost impossible. And we're in the process of contacting CLPs in order to talk about decriminalisation and get a motion proposed. So if you can help us with that in any way, it would be great just to drop us a little email, and we'd love to come and speak and offer any information and answer any questions. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you both. So I'm just going to fire a question at you, and either of you that wants to take it. But one of the things I think that's really important when you mentioned intersectionality there, Kate, is that there's a lot that can actually be learned from groups like ECP. So what do you think that feminists actually need to learn from the work of sex worker collectives like yours? Go for it.
Go on, Kate.
Oh my goodness, what a great question. That is a really good question. What can feminists learn? I mean, I guess speaking from someone that has actually only been involved with ECP probably for like a year and a bit just before lockdown, and kind of the communality of how the ECP and the other organisations within the Women's Centre that we work from kind of organise and support each other in a very holistic way, I think is really incredible. And I think what is helpful in a truly feminist way is to kind of listen to people speaking from the experience that they're speaking from, and in many cases be quiet and listen and ask what help is needed, as opposed to speaking on behalf of. And I think that watching these groups organise, that's one of the massive things that I've learned, and also with a lot of care, a lot of really radical care, which I've been completely inspired by. I don't know if that answers such a beast of a question, or Laura, if you want to jump in and say anything else.
No, that's good.
I mean, that is a question that I think we could devote an entire evening to on its own. But you've given us an excellent response there. So, as Kate was saying, ECP are very happy to come and speak to CLPs. So, if you're interested, do drop them a line. I know that they're always very accommodating, very helpful, very enthusiastic. So, you certainly could do worse. Thank you so much, both of you. We're going to move on to our next speakers, but it was lovely to hear there from Laura and Kate. Now, I hope, as many of you know, you'll be delighted. This is an event for International Workers' Day, and I hope that many of you are intending to commemorate International Workers' Day in some way. But I think because it's quite wonderful for us to be joined by 2 union members to speak to us. So our next speakers this evening are going to be Ivy and Tess, and they're both members of United Sex Workers, who are the sex workers branch of UVW. And they're going to be talking to us about organising and unionising sex workers. And I think could not come at a better moment than as we're thinking about International Workers' Day and the workers' struggles.
Hi, thank you, Chloe. So I'm Ivy. I've been a sex worker since I was 19, a member of United Voices of the World trade union for 2 years, and last June I was democratically elected to be on the committee of the sex worker branch of UVW.
Hi, also from me. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Tess. I've been working in different sectors of the sex industry. Most of my experience is in strip clubs since I was about 20, and I'm also organising with the United Sex Workers of the UVW union.
So United Voices World is a non-trade specific trade union with a high membership rate of migrant workers or those in low paid or precarious jobs. The union is for everyone, no matter what job you do. The awesome thing about being in a cross-sector trade union is that workers from all different walks of life support each other's workplace struggles and stand in solidarity with workers everywhere. This means a cleaner, a lawyer, and a sex worker could all be standing at the same picket line, demanding better working conditions and rights. UVW is a relatively young union and also one of the most radical. The United Sex Worker branch was founded at the Women's Strike in 2018. Sex working activists and organisers of the Women's Assembly came together and identified the need for an industrial strategy for sex workers, alongside the need for a political strategy for the full decriminalisation of sex work. And so USW and Decrim Now were born.
So as sex workers, we're not used to having labour rights. I've worked in a couple of different clubs in different countries, and which some of the workers were sacked because our managers didn't like the way that our hair looked that day, or the way that our breasts looked that day, or because some of them had dared to disagree with one of their wealthier regular clients. I have witnessed some of my former bosses editing video material to cover up abuse from their friends or also wealthy clients against dancers. I've also seen them threaten to cut dancers' visas if they didn't pick up extra shifts that they didn't want to pick up. There's just a lot of strip club owners who think that they don't have to stick to any regulations, they can do whatever they want because we can't defend ourselves. So as we've just heard from Chloe and also from Laura and Kate, we're all very worried at the moment about the Nordic model coming into force here in Britain. But even under the current system, it's really hard for us to unionize the sector because third parties, as we've also just heard, in full service sex work are criminalized. We did have some incredible successes in the last years despite this. So in 2020 alone, we were able to gain nearly £100,000 in compensation from bosses. That was for like unfair dismissal, it was for withheld wages, and also sex discrimination. So generally quite normal union claims. We also won worker status in a strip club in London, which means that strippers there can now get paid annual leave and protection from discrimination, which is a massive success. It's kind of similar to the Uber case that made the news a couple of months ago, but obviously in strip clubs. I have myself had a claim against my former boss who refused to pay me the money that I had made in his club. And when the union got involved, he did eventually have to pay me those wages. Basically, being part of the UVW meant that for the first time, I wasn't powerless against the strip club owner. Now, this is obviously all really empowering and great, but almost all of our campaigns so far were in strip clubs because strip clubs are the only legalized workspaces for sex workers in the UK. So brothels, saunas, parlors, and also stuff like escorting agencies for sex workers are already criminalized, even without the Nordic model, which means that we can't organize them. So any legal action against bosses there would result in the place or the agency being shut down, which means that income is taken away. It also makes it really tricky to report violent crimes committed against us in these places. And then any collective action, the other option that unions often have, is really difficult because we don't want our workspaces to make the news, we don't want them to go public, and many of us also aren't able to be out about being a sex worker in public. And all of this would get even harder if the Nordic model was actually introduced in the UK.
Yeah, definitely. When I was attacked whilst working at a full service club and my bosses gaslit me into thinking it was my fault, I went searching for help and found UVW. The union has fought for workers to be granted full anonymity in court to protect their legal name from being in public records as full service sex workers, and has also helped them gain justice through the tribunal court system, which they wouldn't have access to as individuals. Sex workers have been able to receive settlements of substantial amounts, which has allowed them to become more independent and, for example, set up their own working flat as opposed to being managed by abusive bosses. The union has helped us and other members of our branch get justice, and every year it helps workers recoup thousands of pounds from bosses who may pay them poverty wages and abuse their rights at work. We have also supported sex workers in legal action against discrimination from other organisations, such as financial institutions. 2 of our members were refused loans by banks or local councils for no other reason than that they were working in the adult industry, and we were able to support them to get these loans. We know many sex workers experience loss of earnings due to more financial companies that have archaic and whorephobic policies, and we are ready to take them on in conjunction with our union's legal sector. For many of these claims, sex workers need to be granted anonymity, otherwise we're less likely to take these companies on and pointing out discrimination. This is even often difficult because judges don't believe us when we say that we need anonymity to be safe. Sex work can sometimes feel lonely and isolating. Since COVID and the total closure of strip clubs, the union has given me and my peers a wealth of support and helped me to stay connected to my community. Sex workers are resilient. Whilst lockdown, members of our branch created Cyberteas, a collective virtual strip club show sensation, which brings the most delicious cocktail of erotic dance, sensual performance, and smoking hot socialist politics streamed live to your home throughout the quarantine and beyond. Although it sometimes feels like an uphill struggle, we are honoured and grateful to be fighting alongside all of our comrades or combabes against state repression, exploitative bosses, and those who think they can control us.
So just to wrap up, I would like to say that unionising an industry that is partially criminalised and massively stigmatised is really not an easy task, and the constant attacks from various Labour MPs and also so-called feminist organisations are not necessarily making it easier. But we do believe that having a union for sex workers is an important part of the struggle for sex workers' rights. The UVW is a radical union with a bunch of incredible organisers in it, and it has given me a lot of energy and hope to organise within it. But only in a fully decriminalised system, all sex workers are able to join unions and organise against exploitative bosses. We deserve to have the same labour rights as any other workers in other sectors do. And right now, we need support from all of you to stop the Nordic model from becoming law. We need all of you to speak to your MP, especially if you have a Labour MP, know a Labour MP, or are a Labour MP, and make sure that they're rejecting these amendments and also any other amendments that any anti-sex worker advocates might table in the future. I'm sure that Sarah from Labour for Decrim is going to say a bit more about this in a minute. For now, we're just both really grateful that we can be here tonight and speak about how we're organising the sex industry, and also for your solidarity with the union. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. And I think one of the most inspiring things actually is you talking about the cross-sector solidarity. So I just wondered if you wanted to just tell us a little bit about how we can make that more of a reality, so that workers aren't siloed into different sections, but actually are able to support each other no matter what work we do. We all need to be able to challenge bad bosses and bad laws. Feel free to jump in.
So I think we're already doing a lot of that in the UVW because we have all the support from other sectors. I also think that events like this are really important because it can reach out to other workers and kind of bring awareness or raise awareness for something like the Nordic model coming into place, so that workers from other sectors can just like be there, can support, can also maybe support in conversations with other people, and just kind of raise awareness that actually we need decriminalisation and not another strange model that will criminalise further parts of our industry.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And the other thing I just wanted to bring in is I know that sex workers are actually very international in their solidarity. And did either of you think there was anything that we can learn from that? Because obviously UVW is United Voices of the World. But is there anything you think that we can learn from that in terms of how we can express some international solidarity?
So over the COVID period, we have been involved in solidarity, like fundraising events with sex workers on the other side of the pond. A lot of sex workers haven't been able to access government help or funding, so we've had to rely on like hardship funds or mutual aid. So we have been working together, and people have been coming out and showing solidarity, which is, you know, really great to see. At the show that I mentioned in my speech, we had I think from most of the continents, we had a dancer. It was just so nice, because this would never have happened in another situation, but you know, make light out of bad situations, I guess.
Absolutely. And I have to say that I've been personally really inspired by the mutual aid networks that sex workers groups have been involved in, and especially over COVID, where I've really seen you all mobilise so much to support one another, both here and around the world. And I just want to say thank you so much, both of you, and everybody do make sure you support the work. As I was saying, it's International Workers' Day on the 1st of May, and, you know, big up the unions, and especially great unions like UVW, like United Sex Workers, doing such fantastic work.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Now, we've heard a little bit about the threat, the Nordic model this evening. And that is certainly the thing that's kind of concerning for campaigners at the moment. But we also wanted to let people have a chance to learn about what the alternatives could be. So we've been absolutely delighted this evening, absolutely delighted to be joined by Dame Catherine Healy. And she's going to talk to us about the New Zealand model, which is a decriminalisation model. And that is a model that she and NZPC so very successfully campaigned for and were part of drafting in 2003. So, Catherine.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I've been reflecting, actually. It's 30 years ago on May Day that I stood in a courtroom fighting a soliciting charge. And you know, I think when I hear you describe the situation in the UK and of course other countries where people are working under criminalisation, I think don't lose hope. It's got to come. It makes sense. We decriminalised sex work in 2003. It was a private member's bill. It went through with the support of a Labour-led government. Not all of the Labour MPs lined up to support it. However, we worked in a cross-party way, and the Greens weighed in, and some of the Conservatives from the National Party weighed in and supported it too. The New Zealand model, so-called, isn't perfect, and I want to flag that it's discriminatory towards migrant workers. That is something that we've continued to fight and are hopeful to change. You cannot come to New Zealand with the intention of being a sex worker. So we have a great deal of concern around that part of the legislation, which was introduced by the then Minister of Immigration as an anti-trafficking measure. And of course, it creates conditions for those migrant sex workers that lead to exploitation. I want to, however, move to the positives that have come out from decriminalisation. Our model of decriminalisation is integrative. It allows for sex workers to determine the way in which they want to work. There aren't too many restrictions. You can set up, you can work from home, you can work with your friends, you can choose a manager, you can work in a brothel. There aren't restrictions on the numbers, except in respect to requiring an operator's certificate. If there are 5 sex workers working together as equals, one of those sex workers must get and apply to the district court to get an operator's certificate. Pretty much you can work in an anonymous way. You don't have to register, fortunately. When I was a sex worker, we had the police inventing and creating laws around us, and we had to register. So our anonymity was compromised incredibly, and we had our lives, our lives were intruded upon. The sex workers today can reach out to the police. That was the last thing we would have been thinking of doing when I was a sex worker all those years ago. The police, of course, we know that they are not a perfect organisation, but they have reached out to us to try and foster better relationships so that there are pathways for sex workers to report sexual violence or other crimes that are committed against them. And we've collaborated with the police on developing resources, so things that I would never have imagined have come to pass. There's some way to go, as we all know, when you work with organisations such as the police. We have had outstanding outcomes in the court that have benefited not only sex workers but other people as well. We've settled cases in the context of mediation. We've had massive payouts to sex workers in the context of sexual harassment that has occurred with bosses in the workplace. We've also had sex workers who have said, look, I don't need to put up with this kind of nonsense. I can do something about it. I have rights and I'm going to realise them. We've had people who have challenged being outed with malicious intent. We all, as sex workers, have good reasons for remaining anonymous, and some sex workers have been outed and have been able to take those cases into court and claim damages. So good signs, really, things that you can do in the context of decriminalisation decriminalisation. We've had to fight on a local level, however. I mean, decriminalisation happened in terms of our central law. You know, the law was repealed. We got rid of brothel keeping, living on the earnings, curing and soliciting. However, on a lower level, at local body level, we had to fight local body authorities who had the power to determine where sex work could occur if you were working in a brothel, for example. Even councils who were quite reactionary have become far more liberal and got rid of bylaws or made them far more liberal. So in other words, the country is relaxing a lot more in its attitudes towards sex work. I'm just trying to think here something positive. We know that decriminalisation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen simply with a law change. You've got to work on the minds and the hearts, and stigma, of course, is quite deep. And we'd like to see anti-discrimination legislation introduced to protect sex workers more fully. But thank you for inviting me to contribute.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I certainly think it is heartening to hear about the positives. You mentioned the question of migrant sex workers there. And I think here in the UK, especially where we have a system of a so-called hostile environment for migrants, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how could decriminalisation be introduced in a way that just doesn't discriminate against migrants. So one that perhaps models the New Zealand system, but maybe expands in terms of exactly who is actually able to move forward safely.
That's right. I think, you know, as we look very carefully at this issue, we realise it's not simply a matter of repealing what sits inside the law around sex work. We realise it's a bigger issue. And, for example, you can come to New Zealand and you can do any kind of work except sex work. If we repeal that part of the legislation, there will still be a number of migrants who simply are not allowed to come in because of our different approaches to immigration. So I think there are deeper issues here, and we all have to work very hard on them.
Absolutely. So yeah, it really is about the intersectional approach, I think. We just had one more question for you. It's actually Labour MPs who've been leading the push for the Nordic model in the UK. And we'd really love to know, you know, what message would you give to the UK Labour Party about the Nordic model and about decriminalisation?
Oh, we examined after decriminalisation in New Zealand, there was another select committee hearing. There was a petition that some of the prohibitionists took to the Parliament. So the Parliament decided to appoint a select committee to look at the Nordic model. And bear in mind, this was post decriminalisation. They had a serious look. So they had an opportunity, if you like, to overturn the decriminalisation model, which had passed by one vote. So it was hotly debated. It was very closely fought. And, you know, it was a conscience vote. So each of the members of the Parliament had to examine their own consciences. And I imagine it was quite murky territory for them. So they had the opportunity and they looked hard at the Nordic model and they decided that indeed it was very unsafe, it was unsound, it didn't support sex workers in any shape or form, and you cannot create a situation like that where sex workers are allowed to be sex workers, but they're not allowed to see their clients without a law being broken. So a mindless kind of outcome. So I think you'd be hard pushed to find many people in the Labour Party in New Zealand who would support the Nordic model. And I would suggest that, people in the Labour Party in the UK may reach out to their colleagues down under and find out a bit more about this model.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Catherine. And I think certainly that idea of us taking inspiration from campaigns like those in New Zealand, but also around the world, so that both we in the party and then also our representatives in Parliament can actually make sure that what they're responding to is what sex workers are asking for themselves and listening to sex workers' voices instead of their own ideas about what might seem like a good idea. Thank you so much. Now, our next speaker this evening is going to be giving you all some actions, okay? Be prepared to be called to arms, which I think, International Workers' Day, we celebrate the struggles, but it's also a time to make sure that we're still fighting them, that we aren't giving up. And that's why I'm absolutely delighted that Sarah is going to give a bit of a talk to you all about the campaign by Labour for Decrim and how you can support it and what you need to do to try and support the campaign for sex workers' rights and for decriminalisation as we move forward.
I'm the first one to do that, damn it. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah from Labour for Decrim. Just a bit, I know Chloe said a little bit about us earlier, but just to say again, so we're Labour campaign for the decriminalisation of sex work. So we're Labour members, sex workers, allies, all together, trade unionists, anyone who wants to get involved, please get involved. And it's really because, unfortunately, and I used to go out and say this pre-2019, when we thought we might have a Labour government, that sex workers were living in fear of a Labour government, and it was quite true, and it's still quite true now, because the Labour Party is more likely than the Tories to bring in the Nordic model. So Labour for Decrim is also part of Decrim Now, which is the overarching campaign, which isn't party political, to bring in decriminalisation of sex work in the UK. And some of you will be aware, may have actually signed the letter that Decrim Now released an open letter to MPs to ask them not to bring in the Nordic model in the UK. And that was signed by organisations like Stonewall, Momentum, obviously, the GMB, UVW, UCU, and then also Terence Higgins Trust and the National AIDS Trust released their own letter, which was more aligned to HIV prevention as well. So there's been a large body of evidence and a large civil society push against this Nordic model thing. So just to say where we are at the minute, so let's rewind back to December, and Diana Johnson, who's one of the Hull MPs, brought in a private members bill to try and bring in the Nordic model. And as some of you political nerds will know, private members bills don't really tend to make it into law, but it's an important signal of what people think on things. And also at the time, I was like, she's going to attach it to a government bill. Lo and behold, on the 16th of March, she stood up in Parliament and said she was going to bring forward cross-party amendments to the Police and Crime Courts and Sentencing Bill. I think that's the right way around. To bring in the Nordic model in the UK. Well, sorry, in Great Britain. Northern Ireland already has it. Thank you, DUP. So we have not seen the amendment yet because she has still not brought them forward, because at the minute she is trying to build up support for it within the Labour Party to try and make it a Labour thing to bring in. And this is the thing that is really scary, that it takes root in the Labour Party, it becomes the consensus within the Labour Party, and then in any future Labour Party manifesto, that's what gets included, and that's what we need to stop happening. So really, what we need people to do is to sign the open letter, to send the open letter to their MP. There's a tool on the Decrim Now website that makes it very, very easy to do that. Also, to ask for a meeting with your MP. Just ask your MP if they will meet with sex workers. If you're a Labour Party member, to take the motion for decriminalisation to your CLP, to run a political education event, to take the motion to conference this year, take the motion to Women's Conference this year. LGBT plus Labour now support decrim, but we also know that that is not a one-off thing, that no doubt at the next LGBT plus Labour conference, someone will try and bring in the Nordic model. So this thing is never done. We have to keep on fighting, unfortunately, and we have to keep on having the conversations. So what I'm asking is, because I know so many sex workers and they're fighting so hard for this, but it, like all struggles, people can't do it on their own and they need allies, or as one of my friends says, accomplices, to step up and help them with it. So please do anything you can within the Labour Party, also within your union branches, because part of the big blocker to this is the TUC would be very Nordic model and does not support it. Like yesterday, I had to sit on International Workers' Memorial Day and listen to the TUC talk about workers who've lost their lives at work. But when sex workers lose their lives at work, the TUC use that as an excuse to push for laws that force workers to work alone or for criminals. And what other set of workers would the TUC tell that it's safe to work on their own or to work in an illegal workplace? They just wouldn't do it. But for some reason, when it comes to sex workers, it's a completely different thing. So unfortunately, there's not one thing that is going to win this. It's all little and often conversations, and everyone needs to play their part and take this forward within their Labour Party branches and make this a Labour Party policy and just a thing that, of course, sex workers deserve rights. Of course, sex workers deserve. All sex workers are asking for is the same workers' rights as every other worker in the country. So that's all. And people say, oh, decrim isn't perfect. Of course it isn't perfect, because as every worker in this country knows, workers' rights are shocking in this country. But sex workers just want that little bit, and then they can stand with other workers and lobby for those workers to be improved. So please support the movement. Please get in contact through Twitter. If you want anyone to come and talk, you can send us a tweet. You can email us. We're always happy to come and speak at CLP meetings and to run those political education events. Also, if you just want some information or a chat, or you're not sure about something, just get in contact. Always happy to chat. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It's really great, to hear about all the things that people can do. And I think it echoes Catherine's point about it's not just about the law. It is also about changing minds and changing hearts. Now, we just have a question that we got earlier, which I think would be great if you'd be able to address it, which was actually just a question about how do you think the Nordic model would change things for erotic dancers specifically? So, for example, would you face a situation of strip clubs being illegal, or does it primarily target those who are full-service sex workers?
Yeah, I'm going to answer it fully, but first of all, a nerdy answer to that. In Northern Ireland, when they brought in the law, they didn't actually define what a sexual service is. But Northern Ireland doesn't have any strip clubs at the minute, so no one actually knows if that's the case or what is actually criminalised in Northern Ireland. So, in theory, they could, but all strip clubs in Britain are non-contact. So I think that would be a hard thing to argue. But what we're saying with strip clubs is, again, Labour councils pushing for 0 SEVs. Now, SEV is a sexual entertainment venue licence, which was also brought in by the Blair government, I think maybe the Brown government, which was meant to, clean up strip clubs. Basically, they said, we need to make strip clubs better, so we'll bring in this licensing regime, and it costs lots of money to get it, and you have to renew it every couple of years. Of course, like any licensing regime, it's not actually been done for the workers. It's been done to protect the outside world from some nebulous harm that they see as strip clubs causing. So there's nothing in that about workers' contracts, working conditions, anything that. It's all about externally facing. And also those cost a fortune and it can be taken away at any time. So of course what's happened is that strip club owners don't want to invest in clubs because they can lose it. And also there's this constant battle of people trying to get strip clubs shut down, even though there's absolutely no evidence that strip clubs are responsible for any more violence than any nightclub venue, and actually probably less because they're so highly regulated. So at the minute we are saying Bristol trying to do this, you're going out to consultation again, having only done it a couple of years ago and got the wrong answer in their opinion, so they're going back out again. Blackpool have just instituted 0 SAV, and in my opinion, I think Manchester and maybe Hackney might be next. So this is like a way that local councils actually have, and what Catherine was talking about you get rid of national laws, but there's lots of these local laws as well. And because strip clubs are all licensed locally, we're already sort of seeing this by stealth, whereby legal workplaces are being shut down. And then, of course, what dancers are doing is doing home visits instead, which are, of course, more risky. So we're forcing people out of regulated spaces already and into unregulated spaces, because some of the stuff has been really hurtful around the Bristol stuff, to be quite honest. We've had the Fawcett Society saying, well, these jobs basically aren't worth having because they're self-employed. Like, we don't say that to Uber drivers, we don't say that to Deliveroo people. We know that people need to eat. We also know there's probably going to be a massive recession. And at the minute, the Labour Party in Bristol is trying to actively throw women out of work and say, oh, it'll be okay, we'll find you more jobs. And that is just absolutely maddening. It's very easy to say that when it's not your job you're worried about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to ask another question, really, which is, why do you think that there are some people on the left of UK politics, including these Labour MPs and these Labour councils that you mentioned there, who are failing to properly support sex workers in their struggle?
I think there's a few things. They don't see sex workers as voters, part of the community, part of the electorate. So they don't see protecting sex workers' rights as important. They also don't see it as electorally important. So they know that, we all know there's some big faves on the left who support the Nordic model, and it has no political consequences for them whatsoever, because people are willing to overlook it. It's one of those topics that people just don't think about, and therefore just let it slide. So until they realise that people do care about it, people will not go out, to be super harsh about it. People are not going to go out and door knock for you. They're not going to invite you to their events, etc., etc., if you don't actually stand up and support sex workers. Also, I think it seems like a quick win to a lot of people, in that, oh, we want to be seen to be doing something about violence on women and girls. Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll make life harder for sex workers. We'll get rid of those, a lot of the discussions I have, there's a lot of oh, sex workers are all victims. And then that eventually turns into sex workers cause violence, or sex work causes violence against women. And I think that's, drives a lot of it as well. It's just this is seen as a political thing that people can do, rather than go, I suppose it's analogous to, let's have more police, isn't it? That'll make everyone safe. It's the same sort of, or let's have harsh border, or whatever it is. It's just a quick political thing. But they haven't realised it's not electorally popular. When I go out, I've spoken at 20, 25 CLPs. People get it. People understand it. The membership are not with them on this. And I think they need to hear from the membership loud and clear that the membership know sex workers, sex workers as friends and in their family, and they know what's best for them. And like all the other workers, getting MP letters back that say the idea of sex workers having workers' rights is absurd from a Labour MP is just not on, and they wouldn't talk about any other worker like that.
Okay, we want to finish on a little bit of a positive. So we've got a question in the chat saying, what arguments do you think will work at CLPs? And I also want to append onto that, what actions do you think people can take to support sex workers in their CLPs? So if I let you finish on that one with some positive actions that people can take and positive arguments that they can make.
So in terms of arguments, I think it is, people in CLPs up and down the country know that work is not good, work is not great. Work sucks quite a lot of times, especially under COVID conditions. And sex workers saying, yeah, work sucks too. We just want the same rights as you to turn down bad work. That's it. And people really get that. And they understand that people want safety at work as well. Again, those things I was saying about sex workers are forced to work alone or for criminals. What other worker would we expect to go and work alone? And of course, if you criminalise a workplace, it becomes super dangerous, because you can't have any representation, you can't have any rights, you can't negotiate with a boss. Of course, it's hyper exploitative. And reminding people that they only have their rights, and their boss quite often only treats them the way they do because of the law. If they didn't have anything to back them up, their boss would not treat them well. But I think very much, safety, workers' rights, and that this is evidence-based. that, you know, that's where it's come from. It's not an ideology, it's evidence-based. So yeah, if people can go back to their CLPs, raise it as a topic, run political education events, pass the motion, and hopefully take it to conference. It did go to conference in 2019, but didn't get prioritised, which was historic. And of course, Chloe herself, which is how I know her, took it to Women's Conference in 2019.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think what you've saying there comes back to what Tess and Ivy were telling us about. It's about fighting for workers' rights. It's about being part of a struggle of all workers, of all of us working together against the challenges that we face in our different workplaces, and making sure that we understand that as workers, we actually all have so much in common and so much to fight for. And, you know, I think I'd really, really love it if more people would go forward and take the kind of actions that Sarah was saying. If you sign and share the Decrim Now letter, if you make sure to lobby your MP, if you speak to your local council, but especially if you go into your CLPs and you try and make sure that the motions are passed and that people understand that we need to be standing in solidarity with a key struggle for workers' rights. So thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you really to all of our speakers this evening. That pretty much is bringing us to a close for this evening. I want to say thank you so much to everybody also for joining us. There's a couple of things I want to just remind you of before we go. So we've heard mentioned a couple of times the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which is also known as the Policing Bill. And we know that poses a threat, not just to sex workers, but so many different communities, to the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community, to people of colour, to anybody really that's facing marginalisation in this country. We know it might also make situations worse for migrants in the country. And that's in a situation where it's already bad enough. And so this May Day, there are going to be Kill the Bill protests. And do support your local Kill the Bill demonstration however you can. Hopefully in the chat you should be able to see a link that's got a map of the May Day protests across the country, and you'll be able to find one local to you that you can support. But even if you can't attend a demonstration, it's always great to show your support in other ways. You know, whether that's for making sure that people are aware of it on social media, whether that is raising awareness about the dangers that are posed by the bill. And you can also, I think, follow the Kill the Bill Instagram account, and they have got so much that you can do and take forward in terms of actions. I also wanted to do just a little bit of a shout out to Sisters Uncut, who have been absolute stalwarts in organising things around the Kill the Bill demonstration, but also been really supportive of sex workers and their struggle, and making sure that we understand that this is a question about solidarity. Now, just also this year, it has been a pretty difficult year for so many workers, and many sex workers have faced hardship in the face of COVID. You heard from Tess and Ivy about the way that they've come together and continued to help each other through mutual aid. But if you're able to do so, it would be great if you could consider donating to SWARM, which is the Sex Worker Advocacy and Resistance Movement, and they support mutual aid projects by and for sex workers. So that's a great project to support, and you know, we'd love it if you could actually give them a donation if you're actually able to afford to do so. And then there's also, we raised the question of the National Women's Conference. That's coming up. It's going to be online in June, and you have until midday on the 26th of May to submit motions to that. It'd be great to see some people supporting decriminalisation and anti-Nordic model motions. Absolutely love to see loads of those going forward, and especially pushing for any delegates that you elect to actually make sure that they're voting to support a pro-decriminalisation motion on sex work in the priorities ballot as well. Now, we already mentioned, make sure you sign the Decrim Now open letter. You can sign that yourself, you can share that, you can lobby your MP. Very crucial work. Just once again, thank you so much, so much to all of our speakers. They gave up so much time for us, and it's really, really, you know, wonderful to see them all coming together. And I'm so grateful for all of them for imparting their expertise. This event is going to be available on Momentum's YouTube channel if you want to come back to it, so you'll be able to rewatch. And I hope you found this evening useful. Sex workers really need our support. I can also say that the sex workers' rights movement is fueled by the most genuine solidarity. And I've learned so much about how to be a truly socialist feminist since I began working with Labour for Decrim. And so I hope that you'll all take away something very similar from hearing our incredible speakers tonight and go forward with a feeling that as you continue your struggles, that you're part of that wider whole that we all want to be working with to make sure that we challenge all the injustices that we face in the world. Solidarity.